If you're in a sexless marriage, you're not powerless. Welcome back to the Secure Husband Podcast. Bruce Abbott, certified professional coach and founder of SecureHusband.com. I'm continuing our month-long series on the sexless marriage and this victim mindset that can take over when you're in that situation. If you're in a sexless marriage, there's a feeling that there's nothing that you can do. It is a helpless feeling. It makes you feel like you have to just give up and be okay with this, that you will somehow learn to live with it. I talked about this on a previous podcast where you don't have to just give up and be overtaken by despair. You have more power in a sexless marriage than you think you do, but it's hard when you're taken over by that victim mindset. And I get it, because as men, we want to fix. We are fixers. I've talked about that over and over in the podcast. And when you try to do things to change your wife, if you come to the table thinking, hey, this is all up to her, she has all the control, I'm just the one who's stuck, and either to live with this or divorce, then you feel like I have no power, that I have no say in this situation at all, and that thought becomes your reality. And we talked in the last podcast about how that narrative can take over. You stop trying in certain ways, you start over-trying in other ways, but the idea here is you feel trapped and you're resentful. The victim mindset can be very dangerous because you feel like a victim. You feel that way and you will act like a victim. And those behaviors, I talked about this last time, are going to keep you stuck exactly where you're at. So I want to talk about this idea of feeling powerless in a sexless marriage and why it can be so convincing to you. But I also want to talk about what changes when you step out of that thinking. And I think this is probably one of the biggest pivot points in turning around a sexless marriage. So when I talk about feeling powerless, I talk about this idea of I can't control my wife's desire. I can't force attraction. I've talked about you can't negotiate desire. I can't make her want me. I can't control her emotions. So what do? Well, in many cases, you either give up or you hope and you wait and you try harder, try to say the right thing, try not to mess things up. That's where all of a sudden you become people-pleasing, you start chasing, you try harder. It begins to feel like literally your entire emotional life is dependent on her and her sexual attraction to you. Remember codependence. I'm okay if you're okay. If you're not okay, I'm not okay. Her mood determines your mood at this point. What happens here is her response kills your confidence and starts to cause you to measure your worth to her sexual activity. So in most of the guys that I work with, the comment that I hear a lot is, I'm just going to keep trying. At some point, she'll come around. That becomes the strategy. And there's a phrase that I heard somewhere, I don't remember where, hope is not a strategy. Enduring the sexless marriage is not a strategy. Because what are you going to do when you're trying to endure it? You're going to walk on eggshells. You're going to try not to upset her. You're going to try to manipulate in passive-aggressive ways, overthinking every single action, thought, word, trying not to piss her off, trying to be good enough. What happens if she doesn't come around? This is probably the number one comment I get on all of my little short videos that I put online. They either are like, I stopped begging and gave up, or well, what happens if she doesn't come around? It's really easy to not have an answer to that because you feel powerless. You're stuck in this waiting mode. Waiting feels safe to you. Again, this goes back to childhood survival mechanisms. What are the things that you did to feel safe? Especially if you were waiting for attention, love, affection from a caregiver. That idea of waiting is familiar to you. It feels safe to you. All of this, again, is built on childhood wounds that cause these insecurities, the anxious preoccupied or fearful avoidant, or even for the wife, the dismissive avoidant. All of that is fueled by the childhood wounds. And a sexless marriage is basically two insecure people all being fueled by insecurities. You were powerless as a young child in those situations, and so you grow up, you bring the same coping strategies, so now you feel powerless in this sexless marriage. You feel like the victim. When I say victim, I'm not saying that to shame you. If you've listened to this podcast any, I try to bring all this information to you from a place of compassion, from a place of love. I have been where you are at. I've been there. I have clawed my way through this. When I say victim, I don't mean this from a shaming or blaming or guilting place. But I do use the word victim because the victim mentality, that mindset, can tell you the narrative of she controls everything. There's nothing I can do. I'm stuck unless she changes. She's the one doing this to me. And as I talked about last time, we start to believe that narrative. That feels true. But when you believe that, you give up your agency and you stop leading yourself. You stop making decisions, even if they're tough decisions. You stop showing up as a grounded man. And you will either become passive or reactive. And neither of those solves the dead bedroom. None of that creates attraction. None of that creates respect. None of that changes the dynamic. And I think we're all familiar now of the things that we can't control. Her desire, her willingness. Trying to control those things is going to just drive you crazy. Again, that's where you get the idea of, see, look, I have no power. Let's look at the other side of this. What can you control? You control your standards. You control your decisions. You control your emotional regulation. You control your energy, your boundaries, your reactions and your behavior. Most men, and I did this too, most men in a sexless marriage are not using that power. They're giving it away. They are abandoning it, handing it over to your wife without even realizing you're doing that. It's those subtle ways that we give our power away, through walking on eggshells to avoid conflict or suppressing feelings to keep the peace. Over-explaining, validation chasing, this urge to earn her desire. All of that stuff that feels like effort is actually self-abandonment. And that's what keeps you powerless, or makes you feel like you're powerless. Self-abandonment fuels the dead bedroom. It's like literally pouring gasoline on a fire. I know in my journey, an anxious, leaning, fearful avoidant, married to a dismissive, avoidant wife, I had to really work through this because I had to take a look in the mirror and determine first of all, what am I tolerating right now that's not working for me? And I had to get very clear about that. I wrote them down. I was journaling for a while back then. I'm the world's worst journaler. If you can journal, please do. Be better than I was. But I would journal these things. And I would write down those things. No intimacy, no initiation, no affection. I felt invisible. I felt unwanted, undesired. All those false narratives I talked about in the last podcast all flooded through my brain. But there came a point where I had to just stop and be like, why am I tolerating this? Why? And it comes back to the coping mechanisms. It comes back to fear. I felt like if I didn't tolerate it, I would lose the marriage. I would lose her. And it was at that point that I realized, along with a lot of internal work that I had been doing at that time, I was abandoning myself, try to keep my wife, but in the process, I was actually losing both of those. I was losing my integrity, I was self-abandoning, and I was pushing my wife further away by my reactions. See, power's not control. It's a choice. We choose. Once we see it, the secure husband process, the first thing is noticing, awareness, getting curious. Then it's a choice. It's a choice to take action. And your choice becomes not to try to control her, but about choosing how you show up. It's power that you get from inside of you, saying, this is who I am, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't work for me. And when you do that, you don't come at your wife from a place of anger or manipulation, passive aggressive or threats or any of that stuff, just grounded clarity. Nervous system regulation, so key right here, because your nervous system, it doesn't want to do what's healthy for your marriage. Remember, it just wants to keep you safe. And by keeping you safe means sometimes feeding in to the self-abandonment, because that calms the physiological effects that you feel, tightness in your chest or in your gut. This is about fear. It's fear that keeps you stuck. Fear of rejection, fear of losing the relationship, fear of conflict, fear of being alone. A lot of guys I work with are in their early, mid-50s, some even a little bit older. The thought of being alone, the fear keeps you quiet and not communicating your needs, and it keeps you stuck. Instead of expanding, you're contracting, you stay small, because it feels safer than risking those outcomes. But the reality is you're already experiencing that loss. You're already alone. You already feel disconnected. What are you actually protecting? Power is when you step out of the victim mode. When you do that, the dynamic changes. It's going to take time. You're not going to just do it and flip a switch and it's going to change. But fundamentally over time, when you step out of that victim mentality, you will become less reactive. You will become less needy, more grounded, more clear. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to earn something that cannot be earned that way. The dynamic shifts. She's now not dealing with the same version of you as before. And just to make it clear, this does not mean you become cold and withdrawn. It doesn't mean you become the jerk alpha male. I see this a lot in a lot of red pill stuff. It's act like the asshole and it makes her want you more. That may work in the crazy dating scene of younger, but if you're a family man in your 40s and 50s with kids and a career and a home, it does mean you stop begging for connection and tolerating what's not working. So now you start speaking clearly without reacting. You set boundaries. Go back to that podcast series all month long on boundaries. You take care of yourself. Take care of your health. Get sleep, fitness, hobbies, purpose, male friendships. Iron sharpens iron. You take the lead of your own emotional state by regulating your nervous system. All of that stuff is the power. We get confused because we think that our power is in manipulating our wife. That's not where the power is. I know when I got to a point when I just stopped chasing and trying to fix everything, I stopped waiting around for her to change, and I just started focusing on myself. My energy changed, my presence changed, my confidence came back. But what I was really blown away by was now my wife was noticing this. She was noticing that I hadn't stormed out of the room and sulked in a long time. I hadn't acted from a passive-aggressive manner on little ticky-tack things around the house. And I didn't get upset at things that used to trigger me and I would get upset over. And what happens in many cases, and in my situation, my wife started to feel less pressure, so she started to engage more because she felt the difference. She felt the change. That's the power. It does not look like what we think for the entire sexless marriage it looks like. That's where the power comes. That's where the dynamic shifts. Again, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time. It took me a while. For a lot of men, when you've been putting up with this for years and the stakes are high, and we're talking kids, we're talking finances, we're talking a home, stakes are high. But you're also looking at a lifetime of loneliness. You make the changes and you stay consistent and you stay persistent. And it takes time But you have the power. You always have choices. I'm not saying they're always easy to make, but you always have choices. You always can stay and keep doing what you're doing and be lonely and miserable, or you can stay and show up differently. You can set boundaries, or you can leave. You can. I mean, there's men out there like, well, I didn't put up with this. I left. Some men, that's what they choose. And if they do it from a place of peace and they're not self-abandoning, I'm not one to judge. I had a lot at stake. It was not something I felt comfortable doing, but I've always said in this podcast, the goal here is to become the man that you want to be, to live from a place of peace. It's outcome independent. This may save your marriage, it may not. But the idea is to live authentically. And sometimes we have to make the tough decisions. If you do the work and you change and you become grounded and you embrace your power and nothing ever changes. Radical acceptance, as I said. You may have to make a choice of whether this relationship is right for you. I'm not telling you what to do, but I am telling you this. Saying I have no choice, I have no power is not true. It's just easier than facing the reality that you do, but you are not powerless. And when you see this is what's so painful about going on to like Reddit, those subforums I talk about, sexless marriage, dead bedroom. It's men, one after the other, and women, too. There are a lot of women that post in the dead bedroom and sexless marriage forums. But again, this podcast is geared at men. But the men that I see on there, it's self-abandonment, one after the other. Victim mindset, victim mentality, I'm powerless. This is where the power's from. This is the work. Not changing her, not fixing her, not convincing her, but becoming a man who doesn't abandon himself, doesn't live in victim mode. That's the shift. That's the power right there. So if you're in a sexless marriage, I get it, man. I know how lonely this can be and how heavy it feels. I was there. I was stuck for so long. But I was able to, like I said, I did the work and pulled myself out of all of this. And that's what gave me the motivation to start working with men. I would talk with men and they were in same situations and I would see things and I would just start sharing with them. I'm like, here's what I did. And then the more I did that and the more I worked with men, I was like, this is something that I have a calling. This is something I have a passion for. So that's where I went and worked on my coaching certification, started the podcast, all of these things, because I know how stuck it can feel. I know how easy it is to fall into the victim mindset, that there's nothing I can do. Although for me, it was like I was trying everything, and when nothing was working, that's when I really felt powerless. It's because I wasn't doing the right things. I was trying to do the things to change her. I was not focusing on me. Because I know a lot of men who have done a lot of things, but it just might not be what you've been trying. It's something different. So I encourage you to look at it from this lens. Look at it from this definition of power, so that you can stay away from that victim mentality. Just ask yourself this week, where am I giving away my power right now? Just notice it. Remember, awareness, it's the first step back into your power. If you're tired of feeling stuck in a sexless marriage, you are frustrated, you're lonely, you got to start by showing up differently. I hope this podcast was helpful for you. I hope you're going to enjoy this month-long series. I really want to dive deep into this idea of the sexless marriage and the dead bedroom, because this is probably, as I said last time, the number one thing that people find me and my podcast, looking for something, looking for help somehow, some way. If you found this podcast for the very first time, I encourage you, hit that subscribe button. If you're a regular listener, would you take 2 minutes and go give this podcast a review? Helps the algorithm share it so other men can find it and they can stop getting stuck. And if you need accountability, if you need one-on-one, just somebody to help you work through all of this, I encourage you, go to securehusband.com. Fill out that contact form for a free 30-minute consultation. It's just a conversation. It's not a sales pitch. We just talk for half an hour to see if one-on-one coaching is something that maybe can help you get unstuck. I'll see you again on the next Secure Husband podcast. Thanks for listening.